Hello out there. Welcome to Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan. We're reading through Genesis through Deuteronomy over the course of this year. So come on along with us. We're going to be doing a little portion every day. We're following the traditional Jewish reading. So every week they read a little bit of the law and they divide it up into 7 readings. So today's reading is the first reading of that week, which is Genesis 18, 1 through 14. I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation. And the Lord appeared to him in the terebinth of Mamre when he was sitting by the tent flap in the heat of the day. And he raised his eyes and saw, and look, 3 men were standing before him. He saw, and he ran toward them from the tent flap and bowed to the ground. And he said, My Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be fetched, and bathe your feet, and stretch out under the tree, and let me fetch a morsel of bread, and refresh yourselves. Then you may go on, for have you not come by your servant? And they said, Do as you have spoken. And Abraham hurried to the tent to Sarah, and he said, Hurry, knead 3 seahs of choice semolina flour, and make loaves. And to the herd Abraham ran, and fetched a tender and goodly calf, and gave it to the lad, who hurried to prepare it. And he fetched curds and milk, and the calf that had been prepared, and he set these before them, he standing over them under the tree, and they ate. And they said to him, Where is Sarah your wife? And he said, There, in the tent. And he said, I will surely return to you at this very season. And look, a son shall Sarah your wife have. And Sarah was listening at the tent flap, which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah no longer had her woman's flow. And Sarah laughed inwardly, saying, After being shriveled, shall I have pleasure, and my husband is old? And the Lord said to Abraham, Why is it that Sarah laughs, saying, Shall I really give birth, old as I am? Is anything beyond the Lord? In due time I will return to you. Sorry, I have something came up on my phone. This is what happens when you read it on your phone. Is anything beyond the Lord? In due time I will return to you at this very season, and Sarah shall have a son. All right. So it's a little bit suspenseful there. We're cutting it off, but we'll have some more tomorrow. But first thoughts.
Well, as I said, he was circumcised on what became the first day of unleavened bread. So this is during the days of unleavened bread. What would become that later is when this is taking place. So this is taking place in the spring, I believe. And it's interesting that he says to Sarah quickly, make cakes. They may very well have been unleavened because they were made quickly. So they may have been having unleavened products here. In any case, in Genesis 19, it says specifically that when the angels came to Lot, they had unleavened bread. So it's kind of interesting. It does tie in with what the season would ultimately become. And Isaac was going to be born around this season. That's what he was told. Around this season, Isaac will be born. So evidently, he's healing from the circumcision. When an adult is circumcised, it takes time to, before he can really be very mobile after the circumcision. So he's kind of healing from the circumcision. Now, the Jews, the way they spin this, uh, frankly, it takes away really from the clear meaning of the passage. This is a theophany. God is appearing to Abraham, and he's doing so with the coming of these 3 men. The Jews like to look at it differently because they have problems with its clear meaning, and so what they tend to think is that Abram is talking to God, and then he sees these 3 men, so he more or less asks God permission if he can leave him and go to these 3 men. And so these are 3 angels in their mind. Not that God is visiting Abraham necessarily. Um, but what is evidently happening here is that God and 2 angels are appearing to Abraham in a human-like form. But he recognizes that this is a divine visit, because here's what he says. He says, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight. He addresses him, if you look at the Old King James, as one person, but he calls him Adonai. He calls one person Adonai. So really, he knows he's speaking to God. He's using a plural form, the form that is used for Lord when you're talking about God, because he doesn't use plural verbs here. He says, "My Lord Adonai, if you have now find favor in thy servant," probably it's the old King James. Check me out on it. Do not pass on by thy servant. So it's singular, and so he knows he's being visited by God, and these other two are angels. So, as I said, I would disagree with the general traditional rabbinic spin on this passage. Now, now my son Daniel is checking out the old King James, I guess, to see if I'm right. No, okay, but you can do it. You feel free to do it. Let me continue on while Daniel's checking me out here. Um, foot
I'm
washing.
doing something else.
Okay, foot washing is going on here, which is really interesting. He says, "Put a little, let a little water be brought, wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree." Jesus Christ was crucified on a tree, in one sense. That's language is used, and so in effect we see here that uh, Abraham washed God's feet. Later on, God washes the feet of the 12 descendants of Abraham. It's very interesting to me.
Yes, that's some beautiful symmetry. Another thing about symmetry, I mentioned this before, but yes, and for those of you who stayed tuned, well, I'm getting my vindication because yes, indeed, it is the heat of the day when the angels visit Abraham, which is not the situation in the garden where God is visiting in the cool of the day. So you have a difference. And also, if you talk about the heat of the day, the sun is out. Again, you have the sunrise being when you have the resurrection. So the solution comes at daybreak, the negative comes at dayfall. It makes sense from a symmetrical standpoint. What is interesting is you often do wonder, because the Bible is not abundantly clear, how much of the plan of salvation or theology different people know about. However, it is very fascinating in this situation where, as my dad is saying, that Abraham is visited by three people and he knows correctly how to identify what this is picturing. And I just find that very fascinating. You can take that in a lot of different directions. Feel free to have fun with that and think about what you think that means. Um, Later, it gets interesting where there's a little bit of an aside because you're having this straightforward narration where there's dialogue going on, and then it has an aside because they're talking about, Abraham were old, and and Sarah was, past menopause and everything, and then you get Sarah's thoughts, and it actually hops into her head a little bit, and she's very, graphic, frankly, shriveled, and, well, I have pleasure, and, I don't even think she's necessarily only talking about pleasure as a son, but it's like she's really not at the point that they're probably normal sexual contact going on as a couple necessarily anymore possible. But ultimately, when God talks back to her, to Abraham, he edits that out, right? Because he's much more diplomatic in his response. Because she's like, "Oh, I'm so ugly and or whatever. I'm so used up," and he just says, "I'm so old," right? And I do think it's interesting because first of all, it's just nice, right? It's just, and it's less harsh on her than she is on herself. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of perhaps how God looks upon us, that he does not look upon us, as the frailty of elderliness or whatever you want to say. He doesn't quite look at it the same way. Another thing is too, all right, let's just talk about basic human psychology. Ultimately, what's about to happen is conception, which is going to take certain processes. And why in the world would God want to put in Abraham's head that his wife thinks of herself as super unattractive? Not a smart strategy, just pragmatic. Thoughts?
Okay, did we finish on the 14th verse?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll save one comment I was going to make till later on. But Sarah laughed evidently within, not out loud. So she, but God knew her thoughts, so she was laughing internally. So, but I'll say more about that when we get to the next. Well, I guess I already started, so let me just say, in the next section, she denies laughing, uh, uh, and you can understand she'd be afraid, and she's being honest because she didn't laugh out loud, but he says she did laugh, internally. He can read our thoughts. That's something to be aware of, and and of course it does tie in with the name of the child Isaac.
It also ties in with the idea that what we think inwardly is sometimes what we are as much as what we're doing, right? It kind of connects to Jesus talking about, a lust, and it's, you're doing adultery in your heart. So essentially, she didn't really like expel oxygen to carbon dioxide, go, but she was laughing, in her head. So it's a bit of a it's a bit of a game, right? It's the point of it. The point of why he brought it up was not that she had an action. It was her emotional response to what was going on. Did
Did
something
something
come
come
to
to
mind?
mind?
Something came to mind regarding the Garden of Eden episode. You know, when God comes he's walking through the garden and he says to them, "Where are you?" Of course, he knew where they were, but he's forcing them to respond. And here he says, "Where's Sarah, your wife?" I think he did that because she was nearby and he wanted her to hear what was being said. So I think calling out her name would have gotten her to eavesdrop and listen to what was going to be said because it involved her as much as Abraham, of course. And then she did hear it and she did laugh internally as a result. But I think that one reason why he mentions where is Sarah, your wife, is because this is for you, for both of you to hear.
I think there's something humbling about that too, just from a persuasive standpoint. When you're talking to human beings, the fact that God is limiting him down to the point where we're having to give him information, it's just an exchange, right? It's like how you interact with the child often is you ask them obvious questions because then they can feel like they're adding value to the conversation and things like that.
Point.
Any other thoughts about this?
No, no.
All right, so I hope you've been enjoying the show, and why haven't you been? But go ahead and like, subscribe, hit the bell, comment below about anything that we talked about this episode or anything from Genesis to Deuteronomy. Don't worry, we've got alerts. We'll figure it out. We will find you, and we will try to answer your question to the best of our ability if we can. In the meantime, we will see you tomorrow.